Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sculpting in Modo. Specifically, we're going to be sculpting the leather on these seats. Now, you could, of course, sculpt, or create the geometry for a leather seat, I should say, by using sub-D tools. We could get in there and retopologize this and put all the geometry in that we need in order to create the buttons and the puffs and the folds and puckers and all that stuff that make this look like leather, but that would be insane. And you would kill yourself long before you finished. What we're going to do is basically turn this into a virtual ball of clay and sculpt it as such, and it's going to make life much, much easier for us. Now, sculpting in Modo is, it has some really nice strengths and some significant limitations. So we're going to talk about those in this video, and then jump into some specifics in the next one. So to start with, let's head to the Paint tab here. And we only need to be working on the seat. So let's select the seat frame and the seat leather item. And I'm going to hit Shift-H to hide everything else. And I actually have the seat item set to my reference center. So that's centered on my world here, making it very easy to work with. And then finally, I'm going to go to my viewport properties here, down to the visibility tab, and turn off the grid. So I have a nice clean viewport to work in. Finally, down here at the bottom, you'll notice there is a bunch of extra info, including some sculpt tools, some paint tools, and brushes, and different things like that. In order to get to those, you will need the default content installed. At the moment, I do not have it installed, silly me, but it would be down here. You'll see those icons down there. I find that they get in the way, and it's a little bit difficult to get to those, so I'm going to just collapse this down real small down here at the bottom of the view. That way, we have more space to sculpt, and you can still get to those sculpting tools just by clicking here. It's going to pop up a preset browser with all those handy-dandy tools in there for you, ready to use. It's much easier to navigate that way anyway. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the 3 different types of sculpting available in Modo. I'll show you the high level of how to use sculpting tools in Modo and talk about some caveats to do with that along the way. Okay, so the 3 types of sculpting in Modo are, in order, I would say, vertex-based sculpting, image-based sculpting, and this fancy new one we call multi-res sculpting. And that works with P-subs, aka Pixar subdivision surfaces, aka Catmull-Clark subdivision surfaces, whatever you want to call them. That's a whole other thing. So let's talk about those in order. So first of all, the sort of brute force method of sculpting is just to move vertices around. So if I turn off subdivision on this, so that there is no subdivision on this whatsoever, and hit the D key a few times, now I've got lots and lots of data to work with. I can head over here to my sculpt tools. I'll grab the push command here and right drag in the viewport to change that brush size, and as I drag over, it's going to move those vertices around to sculpt the shape. This is dumb sculpting. We just have a bunch of verts out in space, and our tools are just moving those around. There are some advantages to working that way, and it's a perfectly legitimate way to sculpt. Downsides are that, number one, this is all explicit literal geometry, which means that things like erasing your sculpting is impossible, basically. Your base mesh is destroyed when you do this. Secondly, you just end up with very dense meshes that are hard to work with. They use tons of RAM that's just slow and chunky and probably not great for very detailed sculpting. So let's talk about the other 2. Now, the other 2 are just fancy ways of getting a sculpt onto a low-res mesh. So we have a low-resolution mesh here with very few polygons. In fact, if I just select these, we have a total of 80 polygons there. And that is not very many, right? But I'm able to get very detailed sculpting using one of 2 methods. Image-based sculpting, where I map an image, a 2D image, onto this 3D shape and then use that to displace the polygons. Or I can use multi-resolution sculpting, where there is no image involved whatsoever. We don't need UV mapping, nothing. We just start sculpting. Guess which one is easier? So, while image-based sculpting is really great for video game design and VFX artists, as designers, we really don't need to use it that much, and you kind of need to learn a lot of other stuff about Modo in order to make the image-based sculpting work. As a result, we are going to ignore image-based sculpting for now and focus entirely on P-sub sculpting. which is multi-res sculpting here in Modo. Okay, so I'm going to select the push tool again here, and with this low-res cage, let's make a relatively small brush. If I zoom in here and paint in the middle of a polygon, nothing happens. If I zoom out and paint over some vertices, it's going to move those vertices, because right now we are working in that explicit vertex sculpting mode where it only moves existing vertices and nothing else. That's it. If you want to do this multi-res sculpting thing, however, then we need to enable multi-res sculpting, and that is using this HUD down here in the bottom. Now, if you don't see the HUD over the viewport, it was right up here on the left side of the screen on this and under the Sculpt Tools tab. You can toggle it using that button. And in the HUD, we have a multi-res off here. I'm going to turn that on. And once that's enabled, we'll be able to use multi-resolution sculpting. Now, by default, you'll be at subdivision level 2, which is fairly coarse. So I'm going to right drag in the viewport and drag across the middle of this poly, and now you can see we are getting sculpting in the middle of this poly. I don't have to just sculpt over the verts, I can sculpt anywhere I want, but it does look a little bit chunky monkey. That's because we're working at a low subdivision level. Now if I move this up to level 3, it's going to look a little bit smoother, and I'll be able to get a bit more detail. If I go to level 4, it's going to look even smoother, and I'll get a bit more detail out of that. If I go to level 5, or even hit the up arrow to add another level and get to level 6, then I get very nice, clean detail. I can zoom way in here and get buttery smooth detail right into as tight of a detail as you want. Now, the higher the multi-res level goes, the more video RAM you're going to need, the heavier your computer hardware is going to need to be, because we're creating lots and lots and lots of little polygons in order to make this happen. So I find that on typical machines these days, level 5, level 6, level 7, that's about as high as you want to go. If you go much higher than that, you're going to run the risk of very slow performance and possibly even stability issues, crashing, things like that. So keep it down as low as you need it. Another thing you're going to notice with this multi-res sculpting thing is as I make a brush, let's take a fairly large brush. I'm at level 6, notice, and as I go across these polygon borders, we're getting some chatter that happens right at those edges, and that's partially a performance issue. It's partially just weird things that happen when you're working at a high subdivision level and trying to make very large edits. So that is where this whole multi-resolution sculpting thing comes in. If I head over to the other side here, for example, if I want to make a very large edit and I just drag across here, we get some nasty stuff that happens at these polygon junctures. However, if I go down to, say, level 3 and do the same sculpting operation, it's perfectly clean and we have no problems at all. So what you want to do is do the big macro editing stuff in a low subdivision level. Then when you want to get in and do really tight stuff, then you go up to your high subdivision level and do that. And that way you won't run into those chatter issues along the way. Okay, so now I mentioned earlier the idea of erasing your sculpting as well. We have a couple of ways that you could think of doing something like that. The most obvious is this smooth tool here. There's actually a faster way of getting to that I'll talk about in a minute, but there is an explicit smooth tool here. And if I right drag the viewport and just drag over this stuff, I can gradually smooth this stuff out, and it will get closer and closer to something resembling a smooth surface. We're not really erasing the sculpting, though. We're just smoothing out the existing sculpting, which is a very subtle but important difference. If I want to get rid of the sculpting altogether, we have this tool that is hidden down here at the bottom. By default, you'll see the emboss tool down here. But if you click and hold, we have an attenuate command. The attenuate command is essentially the eraser tool for P-sub sculpting. As I drag over here, it's going to bring us back to the base mesh. So I always tell new sculptors to use that attenuate tool a lot, to erase what you're doing and go back to that basic mesh as you're going. Very, very useful tool. Now you notice that it's taking me quite a while to do that, and that's because the strength of the tool, or the offset amount of the tool, is rather low. Look here in the HUD, you'll see that the offset amount is set to 23%. I'm going to pull that all the way up to 100%, and now as I drag over this, it's going to go away very, very quickly. Let's go over to the other side here just to demonstrate that. You'll see now with 100% strength, this is not going to take very long at all. The only reason it's taking much time at all right now is because I have a very soft brush. So if I want to really just hardcore erase some stuff, let me just draw some stuff out here. We got some nasty stuff out here. I want to erase all of that really quickly. Grab that attenuate tool, shoot that offset amount all the way up to 100%, and then grab the hard brush command. And with that nice hard brush, it's going to be very quick and easy to get rid of all this stuff in no time flat. Finally, the fastest and most dangerous way of getting rid of this sculpting is to just get rid of sculpting altogether. So I'm going to just, say we did some really nasty sculpting here and I want to get rid of it. If I hit the tab key, it's going to warn me and say, hey, there are displacements on this mesh. Do you really want to convert to faceted? If I say yes, it's going to not only convert to faceted mode, but we are going to lose all of that sculpting and you cannot get it back. So take that as a word of warning, folks. Be sure that you mean it when you click yes to that dialog, okay? So I'm going to hit Shift-Tab again, though, go back to our base Pixar sub mesh, and we're ready to actually start doing a little bit of sculpting. Now, by the way, let's talk about working with sculpting tools as well. So let's zoom in here, and let's say we're going to try to create one of these buttons on the back here. So I'm going to turn on symmetry on the X. Symmetry does function in sculpting. So as I'm sculpting here, notice we get that happening. Now I want to add a button to right about here. I'm going to grab that push command. Let's set that offset amount down a little bit, and then I'll grab a nice soft brush. Now I can right drag in the viewport to change the brush size. We've already established that. And if I drag in the viewport here, I start to get a little bit of a lump sticking out, right? Now I do have a way of doing the opposite, however. Let me make a slightly larger brush. And instead of just dragging the viewport to pull out my polys, I'm going to control drag in the viewport to push them in. Then I'll take a smaller brush and then just drag to pull them back out. So you actually have both here in Modo. You can control drag with a tool to reverse its effect. So the push tool is extremely powerful. It's probably the go-to tool, to be honest, for pretty much anything in sculpting in Modo. If I control drag with it, I'm creating grooves in my geometry really quickly and easily, just like that. And if I just drag with it normally, then it pulls things out. It kind of puffs up the geometry as well. Very, very cool stuff. Now let's go back to another limitation of sculpting in Modo, by the way, and that is that sculpting in Modo cannot create holes in your geometry. This is a very, very important point to keep in mind. If I wanted to just blow a hole completely through this so that we have a hole in the top of this seat, it doesn't matter how long I control drag on this geometry. It's just going to keep going in and in and in. We cannot get rid of the geometry, okay? So just keep that in mind. Let me grab that attenuate tool, though. Go over this area and over it just to get rid of all that sculpting. Again, that attenuate tool is my eraser for sculpting, right? Very nice to be able to go back to that. So with the push tool, we can drag to pull things out. We've established. We can control drag to push things in. We can also shift drag to temporarily activate the smooth command. This is the most common way of getting to the smooth tool in Modo. So there, like I mentioned earlier, there is an explicit smooth command here, but there's really no reason to use it. Just grab whatever tool you're using, just hold the shift key and drag over, and that's going to activate it temporarily for you on the fly. Works just great. Okay, so drag to pull, control drag to reverse, shift drag to smooth. Now, also we can right drag to change the brush size. We can control right drag to change the brush hardness. And if you look down here at the bottom right of the viewport, you can see a preview of what that looks like. And actually, in many cases, the most useful one is this one at the top right. It shows you a profile of the current brush, which gives you a good idea of what this tool is shaped like. If you could think of it like a clay tool, you can see that this tool here is very, very sharp. Think of it like taking a pencil to your geometry, so you get very crisp lines starting to happen. Whereas if I shift drag or control right drag this out, we get a very nice big broad flat brush, and that works just the same. So this is a very helpful little graph for putting together your brushes. Okay, and finally, middle drag is going to change the the offset amount of your brush just by dragging. So with those three, you can also drag the offset here, as I established earlier, to change that hardness, but you can middle drag to change it on the fly, either one. So with that, you can get to all of these tools and just play with them, and the names of them are pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through all of these tools for you. The push tool is the most versatile, the most common. It does the most different things, but all of these others are sort of variations on a theme. You can inflate, fold, you've got a clay tool, and carve, scar, flatten. Play with those a lot. Flatten is one I like a lot. I use that all the time. It's great for just kind of taking a bulged area and kind of just taking a palette knife to it in the real world. Very cool stuff. I use it all the time. And finally, like smudge. Now, another one that's not totally obvious that I find really useful is pinch. We have center pinch and tangent pinch. And those do what they kind of describe. So if I've got a little ridge here, sort of a hill happening, if I use the tangent pinch, it's hard to see that, but can you see that you're getting a little bit of a crease here? It's taking the surface and creasing it along the current tangent of the surface. And if I grab the center pinch, it's going to pinch along the center of my brush, which is a subtle but important distinction. Either way, you end up with a very nice crease in the middle of whatever it is that you're pinching, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. And of course, you can hold the Shift key to smooth that back out again. So you can crease it, crease it, smooth it, all very fluidly. And as I mentioned, attenuate is that eraser for you. Now let's say you create a brush that you really like. You could grab the push tool, you set it up just the way that you want it, and you want to save that. Well, down here in the tool panel, we have the ability to save a brush preset. Just click on Save Brush Preset, save it somewhere you can get to it, and then you can add that folder to your preset browser down here and be able to get to those as you need them. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots of tool settings. If you think this is a lot of tool settings, just wait until we add some modifiers to these tools. We have all kinds of modifiers available for these brushes. We can add a tablet nozzle. The tablet nozzle gives you pressure sensitivity controls right down here for how sensitive the pressure is, the strength and the size of the pressure, whether or not size and rotation are controlled by pressure or rotation of your pen, enabling jitter, all that kind of stuff. We also have image ink, which is basically a stencil, allowing you to stencil any image onto your geometry. That's more used for painting than sculpting, though. And then we have our multi-resolution settings and all that stuff down below. And that stuff all adds up here to create a brush. So an important point here is, just like with action centers and fall-offs, if we hit escape one time, it drops the current tool, i.e. the push tool, but it does not drop the tablet nozzle or the smooth brush. Hit escape again, it drops that stuff. So this is kind of an important point. If you grab any of the sculpt tools in the Moto content, for example, it's going to be comprised of a tool and also maybe an image ink and a brush type and a brush hardness and a tablet nozzle and all that stuff. You'll need to hit escape more than once in order to clear those tools out. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're working with them. All right, so that's the basics of sculpting in Moto. In the next video, we're going to talk a lot more about the actual process of modeling something like this, get into some masking, different things like that. So stay tuned. All right, talk to you in a minute.